The family wanted to send her grandfather with Alzheimer's to a nursing home against his 12-year-old granddaughter's wishes. At the final meeting, she revealed something that made everyone change their minds instantly. Sarah's sneakers squeaked against the worn hardwood floor as she pushed open her grandfather's bedroom door at 6:30 a.m. The medicine bottles rattled on his nightstand as she set down a fresh glass of water. "Good morning, Grandpa," she said, pulling back thick curtains. Morning light spilled across the room, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. "Time to start our day." Her grandfather, Robert Johnson, sat on the edge of his bed in striped pajamas, staring at his hands. His silver hair caught the sunlight, making the unruly curls look like a halo around his head. He lifted his eyes to Sarah, blinking slowly. "Who?" He started, then stopped, his weathered face creasing with effort. "You look familiar." Sarah's fingers tightened on the curtain fabric, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm Sarah, Grandpa. Your granddaughter. We're going to get you dressed for breakfast." She moved to his closet, selecting a blue button-down shirt and khaki pants, his old teaching clothes. Behind her, she heard him mumble, "Sarah, Sarah." As she helped him with the buttons, her fingers trembled slightly. 3 buttons were missing, and the thread was fraying at the collar. They needed new clothes for him, but the latest medical bills had cleaned out their savings. "I was a teacher," he said suddenly, his voice stronger. "Yes, Grandpa." "At the university." Sarah smiled, guiding his arms through the sleeves. "You taught literature for 30 years. "Literature." He nodded, then his eyes clouded again. "Who are you?" Sarah swallowed hard. "I'm Sarah, Grandpa. Let's get you some breakfast." In the kitchen, her mother stood at the stove, dark circles under her eyes as she stirred oatmeal. The medicine calendar on the refrigerator had more red X's than pills. They'd had to skip some doses this month. "Morning, baby," her mother said, forcing a smile. "Did Grandpa recognize you today?" Sarah shook her head, helping her grandfather into his chair. "Not really, but he remembered being a teacher." Her mother's smile faltered. "That's something at least." She glanced at the clock. "You're going to be late for school again." "I can't leave until he eats," Sarah said, spooning oatmeal into her grandfather's favorite blue bowl, the one without chips. "Sarah," her mother's voice held a warning. "Just 5 more minutes." The oatmeal grew cold as her grandfather stared at it, occasionally lifting the spoon only to let it drop again. When he finally took a bite, his hand shook, spilling half of it down his shirt. "Who made this?" he asked, looking around the kitchen in confusion. "Mom did, Grandpa. Remember? She makes your breakfast every morning." He shook his head. "My daughter. Where is she?" "I'm right here, Dad," Sarah's mother said, touching his shoulder. He jerked away. "You're not my daughter. My daughter is younger." "Where is she?" Sarah's mother turned away quickly, but not before Sarah saw the tears in her eyes. "You need to get to school, Sarah. I'll handle this." "But now, Sarah." The walk to Alexandria Public Middle School took 15 minutes, but Sarah ran it in 10, her backpack bouncing against her spine. She slipped into first period as the final bell rang, ignoring the whispers from her classmates. Miss Thompson paused in writing on the whiteboard. "Late again, Sarah?" "Sorry, Miss Thompson. My grandfather." "See me after class?" Sarah slid into her seat, pulling out last night's unfinished homework. The numbers swam before her eyes. She'd fallen asleep trying to solve these equations while sitting beside her grandfather's bed during one of his bad nights. After class, Miss Thompson's face softened as Sarah approached her desk. "This is the 3rd time this week, Sarah. And your last test grade?" "I know. I'm sorry. I'll do better." "Your mother called about your grandfather. I understand what you're going through, but I have to get to second period," Sarah interrupted, backing toward the door. She couldn't handle sympathy right now. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. During lunch, Sarah called home from the office phone. "He's having a rough day," her mother said, sounding exhausted. "The nurse is coming at 4 instead of tomorrow. They want to evaluate him again." Sarah's stomach tightened. "I'll be home right after school." "Actually, baby, there's going to be a family meeting tonight." "About?" Her mother paused. "About arrangements." "You mean about sending him away?" Sarah's voice cracked. "We need to discuss all our options. This isn't sustainable, Sarah. The money, the care he needs. I'm helping." "You're 12 years old. You shouldn't have to." "I'll be home right after school." Sarah repeated and hung up. That evening, Sarah's small house filled with family members she rarely saw. Aunt Lisa, who lived 2 states away and always wore too much perfume. Uncle James, who kept checking his phone and sighing loudly. Cousin Michael, a doctor who used big words and spoke about her grandfather like he wasn't sitting right there in his favorite armchair, staring out the window. The facility I mentioned has an excellent memory care unit, Michael was saying, passing around glossy brochures. They have experience with cases like Dad's. Cases? Sarah interrupted. He's not a case. He's Grandpa. Sarah, her mother warned. The truth is, Michael continued, his condition is progressing faster than we anticipated. He needs round-the-clock professional care. I take care of him, Sarah insisted. Sweetheart, Aunt Lisa reached for her hand. Sarah pulled away. You're just a child. This is too much responsibility. Who are all these people? Her grandfather suddenly asked, his voice quavering. Why are they in my house? We're your family, Dad, Uncle James said loudly, as if volume could pierce through the fog in her grandfather's mind. I don't. Her grandfather's hands began to shake. I want them to leave. This isn't. I don't know these people. Sarah rushed to his side as tears started rolling down his cheeks. It's okay, Grandpa. Let's go to your room. I'll help you get ready for bed. As she led him down the hall, she heard Michael saying, You see? This is exactly what I'm talking about. He needs professional. Sarah closed the bedroom door, muffling their voices. As she helped her grandfather into his pajamas, she noticed his old professor's briefcase peeking out from under the bed. Pulling it out, she found it full of faded photographs. Her grandfather picked up one that had fallen to the floor. For a moment, his eyes cleared. My graduation day, he said softly. I was so proud. Sarah stared at the young, beaming man in the photo, then at her grandfather, seeing the same smile hiding beneath decades of life and illness. Tell me about it, Grandpa. But the moment had passed. He blinked at the photo, then at her, confusion clouding his features again. Who are you? Later that night, after everyone had left and the house grew quiet, Sarah sat on her bed, the pile of old photos spread around her. Her mother appeared in the doorway. Sarah, we need to talk about what's best for Grandpa. Sending him away isn't what's best. Her mother sat on the edge of the bed, picking up one of the photos. Baby, do you know how much his medication costs? The nurse visits? We're drowning here. I'll get a job. I can. You need to be a kid, Sarah. Go to school. Have friends. Not. Her mother gestured helplessly. Not this. Sarah gathered the photos into a neat pile. He took care of us our whole lives. We can't just give up on him. Sometimes loving someone means making hard choices. Then I choose to keep trying. Sarah met her mother's tired eyes. Just give me time, please. Her mother stood, dropping a gentle kiss on Sarah's forehead. Get some sleep, baby. It's late. But Sarah stayed awake, looking through the photos, her mind racing. There had to be a way to help him remember, to prove he could stay home where he belonged. In the quiet house, she could hear her grandfather's muffled voice through the wall, talking to ghosts of his past in his sleep. Sarah clutched the photos to her chest and made a silent promise. She wouldn't let them take him away. She couldn't. Tomorrow, she would find a way to bring back his memories, one piece at a time. Sarah woke before her alarm, the stack of photographs still scattered across her bedspread. She'd fallen asleep sorting them into piles, graduation photos, family picnics, teaching days. Outside, the sun hadn't risen yet, but she could hear her grandfather moving around in his room. Not today, she whispered, jumping out of bed. She found him fully dressed in his pajamas over his day clothes, trying to leave the house. I have to get to class, he insisted, fumbling with the door lock. I'm late for my lecture. Grandpa, you're retired, remember? Sarah gently took his arm. Let's get you properly dressed first. His face crumpled. Retired? No, that's not. I have students waiting. Sarah helped him back to his room, her mind racing. Maybe the photos could help. She grabbed a few from his teaching days and set them on his dresser while helping him change. Look, Grandpa, here you are with your students. She held up a yellowed photograph of him standing in front of a classroom. He squinted at it. That's me. Yes. You taught literature at. No, he cut her off, pushing the photo away. That's not me. I need to go. My students, Sarah? Her mother appeared in the doorway. Everything okay? I heard voices. He thinks he needs to teach a class, Sarah explained, still holding the rejected photograph. Her mother sighed. Dad, let's have breakfast first, okay? But he grew more agitated, pacing the small room. The students are waiting. Why are you keeping me here? Who are you people? Sarah's mother stepped forward. I'm going to give him his medication. You'll be late for school again. But, go, Sarah. Please. At school, Sarah couldn't focus on her classes. During lunch, instead of eating, she spread the photos across an empty library table and began cutting cardboard from old boxes into uniform rectangles. What's all this? Sarah jumped. Ms. Thompson stood behind her, looking at the scattered photos. Just a project. Sarah hesitated, then admitted, for my grandfather. I thought maybe if I made cards with photos and information, it might help him remember things. Ms. Thompson pulled up a chair. Memory cards? Yeah, but... Sarah gestured at her first attempt, a crooked, messy card with a photo taped awkwardly in the center. I'm not doing it right. Here, Ms. Thompson grabbed a ruler from her bag. Let me show you how to make them more durable. For the next 20 minutes, her teacher helped her measure and cut perfect rectangles, demonstrating how to properly mount the photos and protect them with clear tape. You could add simple labels, Ms. Thompson suggested. Key details under each photo. The warning bell rang. Sarah began gathering her materials, but Ms. Thompson stopped her. Sarah, how are you holding up? Really? Sarah's throat tightened. I'm fine. Your last few assignments. I'll do better, Sarah cut in, shoving photos into her backpack. I promise. That afternoon, she rushed home clutching her newly made memory cards. She found her grandfather in his chair, staring blankly at a muted TV. Grandpa, I want to try something. Sarah pulled up a chair beside him. Look at this photo. Do you know who this is? He blinked at the card she held, a picture of her grandmother on their wedding day. Pretty lady, he mumbled. That's Grandma Rose. Your wife. Sarah's voice cracked. You were married for 47 years. He shook his head. Don't know her? Try another one. Sarah held up a card with his university photo. This is you, teaching your favorite book, To Kill a Mockingbird. Stop it. His hand started trembling. Stop showing me things I don't know. But you do know them. You have to remember, I don't know these people. He swatted the cards away, sending them scattering across the floor. Leave me alone. Just leave me alone. Sarah scrambled to collect the cards as her grandfather buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. Her mother rushed in from the kitchen. What happened? What did you do? I was just trying to help him remember. By upsetting him? Sarah, he doesn't need this right now. But the doctor said to try memory exercises. Not like this. Her mother helped her grandfather up. Come on, Dad. Let's get you some tea. Sarah sat alone among the scattered cards until her mother returned. The family meeting tomorrow, her mother said quietly. Dr. Williams is coming. He needs to evaluate Dad's progression. You mean decide if we should send him away? Sarah, I'll be at the library after school tomorrow, Sarah interrupted. I need to research something. The next day, Sarah skipped lunch again, huddled over a library computer. She printed articles about Alzheimer's, memory exercises, and cognitive stimulation. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. Sarah? A librarian touched her shoulder. The bell rang 5 minutes ago. She was late to class again, but she barely noticed. Her mind was too full of information, approaches to try, techniques to modify, ways to track progress. That evening, she found her grandfather having a rare good moment, humming while looking through an old book. What are you reading, Grandpa? He smiled vaguely. Shakespeare. I used to teach this. Sarah's heart leaped. She pulled out a new card she'd made, featuring a photo of him directing a university production of Hamlet. You did. Look, his face clouded. No, that's not right. The book slipped from his hands. Who are you? Why do you keep showing me things? Grandpa, it's me. Sarah, your granddaughter. I don't have a granddaughter. He stood shakily. Where's my wife? Rose? Rose! Sarah backed away as he became more agitated. Her mother appeared, already reaching for the phone to call Dr. Williams later that night. Sarah heard her parents talking in the kitchen. He's getting worse, her father said. The episodes are more frequent. I know. Her mother's voice was thick with tears. But a nursing home? James says the one he found costs more than our mortgage. We'll figure something out. We have to. This isn't fair to anyone, especially Sarah. She's so determined to help him. Today, with those cards, she needs to understand we can't fix this. No amount of photos or memories can stop what's happening to him. Sarah crept back to her room, pulling out her research printouts. They were wrong. She just needed to find the right approach, the right combination of images and words that would unlock her grandfather's memories. She worked late into the night, creating new cards, organizing them by time periods, adding clear labels with dates and names. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but she kept going. Just before midnight, she heard her grandfather's voice through the wall. "Rose? Rose, is that you?" Sarah pressed her hands against her ears, but she couldn't block out his confused calls for his long-dead wife. Tears splashed on her newly made cards, smearing the ink. But in the morning, something changed. As she helped him with breakfast, she showed him a photo of his college graduation. He stared at it for a long moment, then smiled. "Oxford shirt," he said clearly. "Blue tie. My father gave me that tie." Sarah's hand shook. "Yes, that's right, Grandpa." The moment passed quickly. Within seconds, he was back to stirring his cold oatmeal with a blank expression. But Sarah held on to that brief flash of recognition like a lifeline. In her room, she circled the small victory in her progress journal with a red pen. One clear memory, preceded by a good night's sleep and his morning medication. She added notes about his mood, the time of day, what they'd had for breakfast. Every detail mattered. Every remembered moment was proof that he was still there, still fighting to stay with them. She just had to find more ways to break through. She glanced at her unfinished homework, then at her grandfather's door. The homework could wait. She had more cards to make. The weekend arrived with a thin layer of dust coating the attic stairs. Sarah stood at the bottom, flashlight in hand, staring up into the darkness. Her mother had mentioned old teaching materials somewhere up there, and after yesterday's small breakthrough, Sarah was determined to find them. The stairs creaked under her feet. The air grew thicker with each step, heavy with the smell of old books and forgotten things. Her flashlight beam caught cobwebs and shadows before landing on stacks of cardboard boxes. "Come on," she whispered, wiping dust from the nearest label. "Christmas decorations, tax records, teaching materials." The box was heavier than it looked. Sarah dragged it toward the attic stairs, trying not to sneeze as dust clouds rose around her. Something shifted inside, making a dull thud. "Sarah?" Her mother's voice drifted up from below. "What are you doing up there?" "Just looking for something. Don't make a mess. And keep an eye on Grandpa. He's having one of his restless days." Sarah heard her grandfather's shuffling footsteps below, followed by his confused muttering. She needed to hurry. Back in her room, she opened the box carefully. Inside, she found stacks of yellowed papers, old lecture notes, and, her heart jumped, dozens of photographs she'd never seen before. Class photos, department meetings, award ceremonies. Her grandfather's life as a teacher laid out in fading images. But it was the leather-bound book at the bottom that caught her attention. Opening it released the smell of old paper and ink. Inside, in her grandfather's neat handwriting, were detailed teaching notes spanning decades. Shakespeare's use of metaphor. She read aloud. Teaching strategies for engaging reluctant readers. Memory techniques for helping students retain complex passages. Sarah sat up straighter. Memory techniques? She flipped through the pages faster now, finding detailed notes on how her grandfather had helped students remember complicated texts. There were diagrams, exercises, and something called visual association techniques. "Sarah?" Her grandfather appeared in her doorway, looking lost. "Have you seen my briefcase? I need my lecture notes." Sarah looked up from his old teaching journal. "Actually, Grandpa, I found something of yours. Want to see?" He stepped into the room hesitantly. Sarah pulled out a class photo from his last year of teaching, mounted it on a fresh card, and added a note from his journal describing the graduation ceremony. "This was your advanced literature class of 1998, she said, holding up the card. "You gave a speech at their graduation about the power of stories to connect people." Her grandfather took the card with trembling hands. For a long moment, he just stared at it. Then, slowly, his finger traced the faces in the photo. Marcus Thompson, he said suddenly. Front row, blue tie. He wrote his thesis on Shakespearean sonnets. Sarah scrambled for her progress journal, recording his words with shaking hands. Tell me more about Marcus, Grandpa. Her grandfather's face clouded. Who are these people? The card slipped from his fingers. Sarah caught it before it could hit the floor. It's okay, she said quickly. Let's try another one. She pulled out a photo of him receiving a teaching award. This time, she followed his old techniques, creating a visual story around the image, connecting it to sensory details he'd written about in his journal. You're wearing your lucky blue tie, she said. The one that smelled like your wife's lavender perfume, because she'd just hugged you before the ceremony. The award was heavy, brass, and wood. The dean's handshake was firm. Someone in the front row sneezed during your speech, and everyone laughed. Her grandfather's eyes focused sharply. Dean Matthews, he said. He had a terrible toupee. Sarah laughed, surprised. Really? Everyone knew it was fake, but no one dared mention it. A smile tugged at his lips. Except Rose. Your grandmother always spoke her mind. Something warm bloomed in Sarah's chest. This was the longest he'd maintained clarity in days. Sarah? Her mother appeared in the doorway. What's all this? Mom, look. Sarah held up the teaching journal. I found Grandpa's old notes. He used to teach memory techniques to his students. We can use the same methods to help him. Her mother picked up one of the cards, frowning. I don't know, baby. The doctor said not to push too hard with the memory exercises. But it's working. He just remembered Dean Matthews and, who are you people? Her grandfather cut in, the clarity gone from his eyes. Why am I here? Dad, it's okay. Her mother reached for him. Let's get you some lunch. I don't want lunch. I want to go home. After her mother led him away, Sarah stayed on her floor, surrounded by photos and notes. She could hear her grandfather's agitated voice from the kitchen, her mother's patient responses. But she'd seen it work. For a few precious minutes, he'd been himself again. She just needed to refine the technique. She spent the rest of the afternoon studying his teaching journal, adapting his methods for their current situation. Her grandfather had written about memory anchors, connecting new information to strong existing memories through sensory details and emotional associations. By dinner time, she had a new set of cards ready, each one carefully crafted using his techniques. But when she brought them to the kitchen, her mother shook her head. Not now, Sarah. Dr. Williams is coming tomorrow to evaluate him. We need him calm, but no buts. Put those away and eat your dinner. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the small moments of recognition she'd seen in her grandfather's eyes. They were running out of time. Tomorrow's evaluation would help determine whether he stayed home or went to a nursing facility. She heard him get up around midnight, his familiar shuffling footsteps passing her door. Quietly, she followed him to the living room, where he stood looking out the window. Grandpa, are you okay? He turned, and for a moment, his eyes were clear. Sarah? Her heart leaped. Yes, it's me. You should be in bed. It's a school night. Sarah bit back tears. He remembered it was a school night. He remembered her name. I wanted to show you something first. She held up one of her new cards, this one showing him in his classroom, pointing to a passage written on the blackboard. Your students wrote that this was their favorite lecture, she said softly. You were teaching them about memory and literature, about how stories stay with us even when other things fade. He took the card, studying it. I remember this day, he said slowly. The chalk dust made me sneeze. The windows were open. It was spring. Someone had planted flowers outside. Yellow daffodils, Sarah supplied, reading from his journal. You wrote about them? Yes. He smiled. Yellow daffodils. They sat together in the dark living room, going through more cards. Some sparked recognition, others didn't. But Sarah recorded every response, every detail he remembered, building a map of what worked and what didn't. When he finally grew tired, she helped him back to bed. As she turned to leave, he caught her hand. Sarah? Yes, Grandpa. You remind me of Rose. Always so determined. His voice was clear, present. Thank you for not giving up on me. In her room, Sarah added his words to her progress journal with trembling fingers. Then she pulled out more cardboard and began making new cards for tomorrow's evaluation. Outside her window, the sky began to lighten. She hadn't slept, but it didn't matter. She had proof now, real, documented proof that her grandfather was still there, still capable of remembering. Tomorrow, she would show them all. Tomorrow, she would fight to keep him home. She just hoped it would be enough. Sarah's head dropped forward, then jerked back up. The math test in front of her blurred. She'd spent the entire night working on memory cards, and now the numbers swam across the page like fish in murky water. 15 minutes left, Miss Thompson announced. Sarah stared at the first problem. She hadn't even started. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably her mother, texting about Grandpa again. She'd had to leave him with a neighbor this morning when the regular nurse called in sick. 10 minutes. Sarah wrote down some random numbers, her pencil shaking. The buzzing continued. 3 texts now. 5 minutes. She couldn't take it anymore. Sarah stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need to use the bathroom," she blurted out. Miss Thompson frowned. "In the middle of a test? Emergency." Sarah was already moving toward the door, ignoring the whispers and stares from her classmates. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone. 3 messages from her mother. "Grandpa, very agitated. Keeps trying to leave. Come home if you can." Sarah's hands trembled as she typed. "Coming." Instead of returning to class, she grabbed her backpack from her locker and slipped out the side door. She'd never skipped school before. Her stomach churned with guilt, but the image of her grandfather, confused and scared, pushed her forward. She ran the whole way home, her backpack thumping against her spine. When she burst through the front door, she found chaos. Her grandfather was fully dressed in his old professor's suit, trying to force his way past Mrs. Martinez from next door. "I have a lecture," he kept saying. "My students are waiting." "Dad, please," Sarah's mother pleaded, trying to block the door. She looked up as Sarah entered. "You're supposed to be in school. I got your texts." Sarah dropped her backpack. "Grandpa, wait." She rushed to her room and returned with the memory cards she'd made last night. "Look, Grandpa, your last lecture was years ago. You're retired now, remember?" But he was too agitated to focus on the cards. "You're all keeping me prisoner. I'll call the police." "Robert," Mrs. Martinez said gently, "why don't we have some tea first?" "I don't want tea." He grabbed a vase from the side table and threw it. It shattered against the wall, water and flowers spraying everywhere. Sarah's mother pushed her toward the kitchen. "Call Dr. Williams." 20 minutes later, the doctor arrived. He gave Sarah's grandfather a sedative, and soon the old man was sleeping in his chair, his suit jacket wrinkled and damp with sweat. "This is the 3rd episode this week," Dr. Williams said, packing up his bag. "We need to discuss increased supervision." "We have a nurse most days," Sarah's mother began. "It's not enough." The doctor's voice was firm. "He needs 24-hour professional care." "And Sarah," he turned to her, "the school called. You can't keep missing classes. I had to help." "You're a child." He cut her off. "This isn't your responsibility." After he left, Sarah's mother turned to her with tired eyes. "Go back to school?" "But now, Sarah. And Principal Garcia wants to see you as soon as you get there." The walk back to school felt longer than usual. Sarah's legs were heavy, her mind racing with images of her grandfather's distressed face. Principal Garcia was waiting in her office, Sarah's unfinished math test on her desk. "Sit down, Sarah." The principal folded her hands. "Ms. Thompson tells me you've been struggling in class. Falling asleep, missing assignments, and now leaving in the middle of a test. I can explain. Your mother told us about your grandfather. And while we sympathize with your situation, you cannot continue to let it affect your education." Sarah stared at her hands. "I'm trying. Your grades have dropped significantly. If this continues, you might have to repeat the year." "What?" Sarah's head snapped up. "But I've always been a good student." "You were. But lately." Principal Garcia pushed a paper across her desk. It was Sarah's latest report card. Every grade had dropped at least 2 letters. "I can do better," Sarah whispered. "I'm scheduling a meeting with your parents next week. Until then, no more leaving school early. No more skipping classes. Understood?" Sarah nodded numbly. The rest of the day passed in a fog. During lunch, she tried to catch up on homework, but her eyes kept closing. The cafeteria noise faded in and out like a badly tuned radio. After school, she found Ms. Thompson waiting by her locker. "I can help you make up the test," her teacher said. "But we need to talk about what's going on." Sarah shoved books into her backpack. "I'm fine. Your mother mentioned you're trying to help your grandfather with memory exercises?" "They're working," Sarah insisted. "Sometimes he remembers things. Important things." Miss Thompson's face softened. "Sarah, Alzheimer's is progressive. You can't. I have to get home." Sarah slammed her locker shut and hurried away. But she didn't go home. Instead, she went to the public library, where she spent hours researching new memory techniques. She couldn't afford to sleep through any more classes, so she developed a system. Work with Grandpa during dinner, study until midnight, sleep for a few hours, then wake up early to do more memory exercises before school. The next few days fell into this exhausting pattern. She dozed through classes, but managed to stay awake enough to avoid more teacher concerns. During lunch, she worked on memory cards. After school, she rushed home to help with her grandfather. Some days were better than others. On Thursday, he recognized a photo of his old department chair and talked for 10 minutes about their weekly chess games. On Friday, he couldn't remember his own name and tried to walk to his childhood home in Georgia. Sarah recorded everything in her progress journal: the successes, the failures, the patterns she noticed. She worked through dinner, ignoring her mother's worried looks. "Sarah," her mother said one evening, finding her asleep on her desk, surrounded by cards. "This has to stop." "I'm fine," Sarah mumbled, lifting her head from a puddle of drool on her homework. "You're not fine. Look at yourself." Sarah caught her reflection in the window, dark circles under her eyes, hair a mess, yesterday's clothes wrinkled from sleeping in them. "The nurse said he's getting worse," her mother continued softly. "The memory cards, the exercises, they're not stopping the progression. They're helping. Sometimes he remembers. Brief moments that don't last. Meanwhile, you're destroying yourself." Sarah gathered her cards protectively. "I won't give up on him. No one's asking you to give up. But you need to accept that we can't fix this. He needs professional care." "No." Sarah stood up so fast her chair toppled over. "No nursing home. I won't let you send him away." She ran to her grandfather's room, where he sat in his chair, staring out the window. "Grandpa, tell them you want to stay home." He turned to her with blank eyes. "Do I know you?" Sarah's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, the memory cards scattering around her like fallen leaves. Her mother helped her up, led her back to her room. "Get some sleep, baby. Please." But Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to her grandfather's familiar shuffling, his confused mumblings. Around midnight, she got up and retrieved the fallen cards. In the dim light of her desk lamp, she began reorganizing them, marking the ones that had sparked recognition. There had to be a pattern, a key to unlocking more memories. She worked through the night, fueled by determination and fear. They were running out of time. Every failed memory was another point for those who wanted to send him away. As dawn crept through her window, Sarah finally had an idea. She couldn't keep missing school. That would only make things worse. But maybe she could use the nighttime hours more effectively. She created a schedule, plotting out every hour of her day. School during the day, homework right after, memory exercises with Grandpa during his most lucid evening hours, then intensive research and card preparation at night. She could sleep during lunch period, maybe during history class too. She was good at history anyway. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was something, a way to keep fighting, to keep trying to prove that her grandfather could stay home where he belonged. Sarah glanced at her clock. Almost time for school. She hadn't slept at all, but it didn't matter. She had a plan now. She just had to make it work. The red F on Sarah's math test seemed to glow against the white paper. She blinked hard, trying to focus on Ms. Thompson's words written below. "See me after class. We need to talk." Her perfect grade record, maintained since first grade, was now officially ruined. Sarah shoved the test in her backpack as the lunch bell rang. Instead of heading to the cafeteria, she made her way to Ms. Thompson's desk. "Sarah." Ms. Thompson's face was etched with concern. "This is your third failed test this month." "I know. I'm sorry. I'll do better." "You said that last time." Ms. Thompson pulled out a folder. "I've been tracking your grades. You haven't turned in homework for 2 weeks. You sleep through most classes. Today, you couldn't even solve basic equations you mastered months ago. Sarah stared at her shoes. There was a hole forming in the left one. I want to help, Miss Thompson continued. I'm offering after-school tutoring. 3 days a week, well, I can't, Sarah cut in. I have to be home after school. My grandfather. Your education has to come first, Sarah. He needs me, and you need to pass 7th grade. Miss Thompson leaned forward. At this rate, you won't. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She couldn't repeat a grade. She couldn't. I'll figure something out, she mumbled, backing toward the door. Sarah, wait, but she was already running down the hall, past the cafeteria where kids laughed and ate lunch, past her locker with its stack of overdue assignments. She didn't stop until she reached the girls' bathroom, where she locked herself in a stall and tried to breathe. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Grandpa having bad day. Nurse called in sick again. Coming home? Sarah's hands shook as she typed yes. One more missed afternoon. One more step toward failing 7th grade. She found her grandfather in the living room, agitated and confused. The nurse's absence had disrupted his routine. Who moved my books? He demanded, pulling volumes off shelves. My lecture notes, my research. Grandpa, your books are right here. Sarah picked up the mess he was making. You're retired now, remember? No more lectures. Retired? His voice rose. I'm not retired. I have tenure. Where's the dean? I need to speak to the dean. Sarah reached for her memory cards, but he knocked them from her hands. One of them caught her cheek, leaving a small paper cut. I don't know you, he shouted. Stop pretending you know me. Where's my wife? Rose. Dad. Sarah's mother burst through the front door, still wearing her work uniform. Sarah, what happened? He got upset about his books. You're bleeding. Sarah touched her cheek, her fingers coming away with a small smear of blood. Her mother's face hardened. That's it. I'm calling Dr. Williams, no. Mom, please, it was an accident. But her mother was already dialing. 20 minutes later, Dr. Williams arrived with a nurse Sarah hadn't seen before. This behavior is escalating, the doctor said after examining her grandfather. The aggression, the confusion. He needs more than you can provide here. We can't afford full-time care, Sarah's mother protested. You can't afford not to have it. Next time it might be worse than a paper cut. The nurse helped Sarah's grandfather to his room for a rest. Sarah could hear him asking for his wife, his voice gradually growing quieter as the sedative took effect. I've arranged tours at 3 care facilities, Dr. Williams continued, all with excellent memory care units. No, Sarah interrupted. He's not going. Sarah, her mother warned. Look at these. Sarah grabbed her progress journal. He remembered playing chess last week. He recognized his old colleague. The cards are working. Dr. Williams took the journal, flipping through it with a frown. These moments of lucidity are temporary. They don't indicate improvement. But, Sarah, the doctor's voice was firm. Alzheimer's is a progressive disease. It only moves in one direction. These brief recognitions you're recording, they're like windows opening in a crumbling wall. Eventually, the wall falls anyway. Sarah snatched her journal back. You're wrong. Sarah, her mother looked mortified. Apologized to Dr. Williams instead. Sarah ran to her room, slamming the door. She could hear them talking downstairs, adult voices discussing her grandfather's fate, as if he were already gone. Her phone buzzed again. A new email from Principal Garcia. Meeting tomorrow morning regarding academic standing. Parent/guardian attendance required. Sarah's vision blurred. She slid down the wall to sit on her floor, surrounded by scattered memory cards and failed tests. That evening, her mother brought dinner to her room. You need to eat something. Sarah poked at the cold mac and cheese. Are you going to the meeting tomorrow? Of course. Her mother sat on the bed. Baby, I know you're trying to help Grandpa, but you're killing yourself in the process. Your grades, I can fix them. How? By sleeping through more classes? Missing more tests? Sarah pushed the food away. I just need more time. Time isn't the problem, Sarah. You can't save him. No one can. Get out. Sarah, get out. After her mother left, Sarah pulled out her grandfather's old journal again. There had to be something she'd missed, some technique she hadn't tried yet. Around midnight, she heard him get up, his shuffling footsteps past her door, headed downstairs. Sarah followed quietly. She found him in the kitchen, trying to make tea with cold water and no tea bag. Let me help, Grandpa. He looked at her blankly. Do you work here? No, I'm Sarah. Your granddaughter. I don't have a granddaughter. He turned back to his task. Need to grade papers. Students waiting. Sarah fought back tears. Here, let me show you something. She grabbed her latest memory card. A photo of them together at her 11th birthday party, just before his diagnosis. In it, they both smiled at the camera, his arm around her shoulders as she blew out the candles. This was last year, she said. Remember? You got me that chemistry set I wanted. We did experiments every weekend. He squinted at the photo. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Sarah, her heart leaped. Yes, it's me. But the recognition faded as quickly as it came. He pushed the card away, anxiety creasing his face. Need to grade papers, he mumbled. Students waiting. Sarah's hands fell to her sides. She watched him shuffle around the kitchen, looking for papers that didn't exist, preparing for a class he would never teach again. When her mother came down to help him back to bed, Sarah remained in the kitchen. She sat at the table until dawn, staring at the memory card that had almost worked, almost brought him back. Almost wasn't enough anymore. Her phone alarm buzzed. Time to get ready for school. For the meeting that would determine if she failed 7th grade. She looked at her reflection in the dark kitchen window. Hollow eyes, unwashed hair, yesterday's clothes. The girl in the birthday photo was gone, replaced by someone she barely recognized. Just like her grandfather, she was disappearing piece by piece. Something had to change. But what scared her most was the thought that maybe Dr. Williams was right. Maybe nothing she did would be enough to keep her grandfather's memories from slipping away forever. The sun rose over Alexandria, painting the kitchen in shades of orange and gold. Another day of decisions and disappointments stretched ahead. Sarah gathered her things for school, adding one more failed test to her already heavy backpack. In a few hours, they would decide her academic fate. In a few days, they would decide her grandfather's. Time was running out for both of them. Sarah's hands moved methodically, sorting memory cards into neat piles on her bedroom floor. Success pile, cards that had sparked recognition. Failure pile, ones that hadn't worked. Maybe pile, cards that had produced partial memories. The success pile was getting smaller. Her school backpack lay unopened in the corner. After the morning meeting with Principal Garcia, there didn't seem much point in doing homework. Academic probation, the principal had said, writing the words in red on Sarah's file. 1 month to bring up all grades to passing, or repeat the year. Now Sarah had 2 deadlines hanging over her head. 1 month to save her academic career. 3 days until the family meeting that would decide her grandfather's fate. A knock on her door interrupted her sorting. Sarah? Miss Thompson's voice caught her by surprise. Your mother asked me to stop by. Sarah didn't answer, but her teacher came in anyway, carefully stepping around the card piles. What's all this? Documentation. Sarah held up her progress journal. Proof that the memory exercises work sometimes. Miss Thompson sat on the edge of the bed. May I see? Sarah handed over 3 months of careful notes. Every recognition, every clear moment, every smile of understanding, all recorded in precise detail. This is... Miss Thompson flipped through the pages. This is incredibly thorough. It has to be. For the meeting. What meeting? Family's coming Saturday. To decide about the nursing home. Sarah's voice cracked. I have to show them he can stay home. Miss Thompson studied the journal. You've created a research project here. Hypothesis, methodology, data collection. What? Look, her teacher pointed to Sarah's neat columns. You're tracking variables, time of day, medication schedule, types of memories that spark recognition. This is real scientific observation. Sarah had never thought of it that way. She'd just been trying to find patterns to understand what worked and what didn't. Have you shown this to Dr. Williams? He says it doesn't matter, that the memories will keep fading no matter what I do. Miss Thompson handed back the journal. Maybe the point isn't stopping the fade. Maybe it's making the most of the clear moments when they come. Sarah looked up sharply. What do you mean? Your notes show patterns. Times when recognition is more likely. Situations that tend to spark memories. That's valuable information, even if it can't cure the disease. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a spark of hope. Will you help me organize this for the meeting? Make it more Scientific? Ms. Thompson smiled. That's why I'm here. Your mother asked me to help you prepare. They spent the next few hours reorganizing Sarah's data. Ms. Thompson showed her how to create clear charts showing success rates with different types of memory cards. They mapped out peak recognition times and identified triggers that seemed to help or hurt his recall. Now, Ms. Thompson said as evening approached, you need to practice presenting this. Sarah's stomach clenched. Practice? You'll have doctors and family members to convince. You need to be clear, confident, and professional. They cleared a space on Sarah's floor. Ms. Thompson sat in the desk chair, pretending to be Dr. Williams. Tell me why your grandfather should stay home, she said in a deeper voice. Sarah clutched her journal. Because he needs to... No. Ms. Thompson broke character. Start with your data. Show them the evidence first, then make your argument. They practiced for another hour. Sarah learned to lead with her strongest examples, to anticipate questions, to speak clearly even when her voice wanted to shake. As Ms. Thompson packed up to leave, she paused at the door. Sarah, whatever happened Saturday, you've done something remarkable here. Don't forget that. After she left, Sarah's mother peeked in. How did it go? Good, I think. Sarah was already adding notes to her presentation outline. Mom, did you really ask Ms. Thompson to help? Her mother sat beside her on the floor. I know how much this means to you. I want you to have the best chance to make your case. But you still think you should go to a home? I think we need to consider all options. She touched Sarah's hand. Just like you need to consider summer school to make up your grades. Sarah pulled away. I can't think about that right now. Baby, 3 days, Mom. Give me 3 more days. Her mother sighed but nodded. Get some sleep tonight? Okay. You need to be sharp for Saturday. But Sarah didn't sleep. She spent the night practicing her presentation, refining her charts, reviewing every note she'd taken since this all began. Friday passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah skipped school. One more absence wouldn't matter now, and focused on organizing her materials. She created backup copies of everything, rehearsed her talking points, and made sure every memory card was properly labeled. That evening, she found her grandfather having a rare clear moment, reading a book in his chair. Grandpa, can you help me with something? He looked up, recognition flickering in his eyes. Sarah? Yes. She sat beside him, heart pounding. I need to practice a presentation. Will you listen? For 20 minutes, he sat quietly as she went through her materials. He didn't understand most of it, but he stayed focused on her voice. Finally, he said, You remind me of your grandmother. She never gave up on anything either. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I won't give up on you, Grandpa. I promise. The moment passed. His eyes clouded over, and he returned to his book, no longer aware of her presence. Sarah added this interaction to her journal. One more piece of evidence that connection was still possible. Saturday morning arrived too quickly. Sarah's hands shook as she set up her materials in the living room. Her mother had arranged the chairs in a semicircle, like a classroom. Family members began arriving. Aunt Lisa with her overpowering perfume. Uncle James checking his phone. Cousin Michael in his doctor's coat, straight from his hospital shift. Dr. Williams arrived last, carrying a thick folder of medical records. Before we begin, he said, taking his seat, I want to review Mr. Johnson's latest test results. Actually, Sarah's voice came out stronger than she expected. I'd like to present something first. Everyone turned to look at her. Her mother gave an encouraging nod. Sarah took a deep breath and opened her journal. Over the past 3 months, I've been documenting every interaction with Grandpa. Every memory exercise, every moment of recognition, every technique that helped or didn't help. She walked them through her charts, her voice growing steadier as she presented her data. She showed them videos she'd recorded of her grandfather's clear moments. She demonstrated her memory card system, explaining how she'd adapted his own teaching techniques. The disease is progressing, she acknowledged, but these methods help us connect with him when he's most lucid. Look at the pattern. Mornings after full sleep, about an hour after medication, when the room is quiet and familiar. Sarah, Dr. Williams interrupted. These are just temporary. I know they're temporary, she cut in. I know we can't stop the memories from fading, but we can make the most of the time he has left. We can help him hold on to himself a little longer. She pulled out her final piece of evidence, the birthday photo that had sparked recognition just days ago. He's still in there, still fighting to stay connected to us, sending him away, surrounding him with strangers. That would only make him more confused, more afraid. Her voice cracked. She gripped the edge of her chart stand to stay steady. Please, give us more time. Let me show you what else we can do to help him. Silence fell over the room. Sarah could hear her own heart pounding. Then her grandfather shuffled in from the kitchen. Everyone tensed, waiting for confusion or agitation. But he walked straight to Sarah's chart stand and picked up one of the memory cards. Sarah, he said clearly, touching the photo of them at her birthday. My granddaughter. Sarah's hands began to shake. She hadn't planned this, hadn't dared hope for a moment of clarity right now. Yes, Grandpa. It's me. He turned to the gathered family members, his eyes sharp and present. She helps me remember, he said. Then the fog returned, and he shuffled back toward the kitchen, leaving stunned silence in his wake. Dr. Williams cleared his throat. Well, that was unexpected. That's what I've been trying to show you, Sarah said softly. The moments are still there. We just have to know how to find them. More silence. Sarah's legs felt weak. She'd done everything she could, said everything she could think to say. Now they would decide. Dr. Williams flipped through Sarah's journal again, his forehead creased in concentration. The living room remained silent except for the gentle ticking of the old wall clock and her grandfather's muffled humming from the kitchen. This level of documentation is impressive, Dr. Williams finally said. But I'm concerned about the burden it places on you, Sarah. It's not a burden, Sarah insisted. Let me show you more. She pulled out her laptop, hand steady now as she opened a video file. The screen showed her grandfather sitting at the kitchen table 2 weeks ago, looking at memory cards. Watch what happens when I combine visual and auditory triggers. In the video, Sarah's voice asked, Remember this classroom, Grandpa? You used to tap your chalk 3 times before starting each lecture. Video Sarah tapped a pencil 3 times on the table. Her grandfather's face lit up with recognition. Always check for chalk dust, he said clearly. Students can't learn if they're sneezing. The real Sarah paused the video. See? When I match his old routines with the visual cues, he connects better. I documented 57 instances of this working. Aunt Lisa dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. I haven't seen him this clear in months. Temporary lucidity doesn't change the diagnosis, Cousin Michael argued. The neural degeneration continues regardless of, I know that, Sarah cut in. But look at this. She spread out a timeline, showing her grandfather's episodes of confusion and agitation. They decrease by 60% when we maintain familiar routines and use memory aids consistently. His sleep improves. His anxiety levels drop. The nursing facility would have trained staff, Uncle James pointed out, finally looking up from his phone. Who don't know him, Sarah countered. Who don't understand his patterns, his history. She pulled out another chart. Look at recognition rates with strangers versus family members. The difference is significant. Dr. Williams leaned forward. May I see your methodology for tracking these behaviors? Sarah handed him her observation logs. 3 months of careful notes, color-coded by type of interaction, time of day, and success rate. You developed this system yourself? Most of it. Sarah glanced at her mother. Miss Thompson helped me organize the data better. Your science teacher? Dr. Williams raised an eyebrow. She's been helping Sarah prepare, her mother explained. She saw the research value in what Sarah was doing. Michael snorted. Research? This is a child playing scientist with. With remarkable results, Dr. Williams interrupted. He held up one of Sarah's charts. These behavior patterns align with several recent studies on environmental familiarity in Alzheimer's patients. Sarah's heart leaped. Really? The correlation between routine maintenance and reduced agitation is particularly noteworthy. He turned to Sarah's mother. How often do you utilize these memory techniques? Her mother looked down. I haven't been as involved as Sarah. My work schedule. That's why we need professional care, Michael insisted. Or, Dr. Williams said slowly, we need a better system for implementing these methods as a family. Sarah straightened. I've been working on that too. She pulled out a detailed schedule she'd created, showing how different family members could share the memory work. Mom's home in the mornings. Aunt Lisa could help during her lunch breaks since she works nearby. Uncle James could. I have meetings, James protested. For 1 hour a week? Sarah's voice cracked. That's all I'm asking. 1 hour each to help him hold on to who he is. The room fell silent again. In the kitchen, they could hear her grandfather talking to himself, reciting what sounded like a Shakespeare sonnet. Sarah clicked to another video on her laptop. This one showed her grandfather looking through a photo album with her mother. Tell me about this picture, Dad, video mom said. Your first piano recital. He responded immediately. You were so nervous. You forgot to bow at the end. The real Sarah's mother made a soft sound. I didn't know he remembered that. He remembers more than we think, Sarah said. We just have to know how to help him find the memories. She played more clips. Her grandfather recognizing old students in photos, reciting passages from books he used to teach, even remembering a recipe he and Sarah's grandmother used to make together. These moments, she gestured at the screen, they're still him, still part of who he is. We can't just give up because it's hard or inconvenient. No one's giving up, Michael said. The facility would provide expert care. From strangers. Sarah pulled out one final chart. Look at his anxiety levels with unfamiliar caregivers. His confusion gets worse, not better. He needs people who know his stories, who understand his patterns. The cost of in-home care, James began. I've researched that too. Sarah handed out papers showing different care options and their costs. If we split the expenses, share the time commitment, it's possible. Difficult but possible. She turned to Dr. Williams. You said my documentation matches real research. Doesn't that mean something? Doesn't it prove this approach has value? The doctor studied her charts again. It suggests a correlation between familiar environments and improved cognitive function, yes. But Sarah, maintaining this level of intensive care, I can do it. We can do it. She looked around at her family. Unless you really don't want to try. The accusation hung in the air. Aunt Lisa squirmed in her seat. Uncle James suddenly found his phone fascinating again. Perhaps, Dr. Williams said carefully, we should consider a hybrid approach. Everyone turned to him. Continue the home care for now, but with additional professional support. Monitor the results using Sarah's documentation methods. If the benefits continue to outweigh the challenges, a trial period? Sarah's mother asked. The doctor nodded. 3 months, with clear metrics for success or failure. He held up Sarah's journal. Using this level of detailed observation, I can help set up the monitoring system, Michael offered, surprising everyone. From a medical perspective, this kind of data could be valuable. Sarah hardly dared breathe. So, he can stay? For now. Dr. Williams wrote something in his notes. But Sarah, you have to focus on school too. No more failing grades. I'll help with that, her mother said. Maybe cut back some hours at work. I can come by twice a week, Aunt Lisa added. During lunch, those memory card sessions, I like to learn how to do them. Uncle James sighed heavily. Fine, I'll take Sunday afternoons. But we need a clear schedule. Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled out the family schedule she created. I already made one. See, if everyone takes just a few hours. They spent the next hour working out details. Who would cover which times? How to coordinate medications and memory exercises. When to schedule professional help to fill the gaps. Through it all, Sarah kept glancing at the kitchen door, where her grandfather's voice drifted in and out, sometimes clear, sometimes confused, but always his. Finally, Dr. Williams closed his notebook. We'll reconvene in 1 month to assess progress. Sarah, I want weekly updates on his responses to the memory work. I'll email you my observation logs every Sunday, she promised. As everyone gathered their things to leave, her grandfather wandered back into the living room. Time for class? He asked, looking around in confusion. No, Grandpa. Sarah took his arm. But would you like to look at some photos with me? He smiled vaguely. You help me remember things? Yes. She led him to his favorite chair. That's exactly what I do. Over his head, she met her mother's eyes. They shared a small, tired smile. It wasn't a perfect solution. It wasn't even a guaranteed one. But it was a chance. A chance to keep him home, to keep trying, to keep fighting for every precious moment of clarity. For now, that would have to be enough. The new schedule hung on the refrigerator, color-coded blocks marking each family member's time with Grandpa. Sarah stood in the kitchen early Monday morning, adding check marks to her first week of observations. 7 days into their 3-month trial period. "Morning, baby." Her mother shuffled in, already wearing her diner uniform. "How's the tracking going?" "Good." Aunt Lisa's session yesterday showed real progress. Sarah pointed to her notes. He recognized 3 people in his old faculty photos. "That's wonderful." Her mother started the coffee maker. "And how's the math tutoring?" Sarah pulled out her latest quiz. A bright red B stood out at the top. Her mother's face lit up. "Sarah, that's fantastic. Miss Thompson says I might be able to bring my grade up to a C+ by the end of the month." Sarah tucked the quiz away. "Maybe even a B if I keep working hard." The coffee maker gurgled as morning light filled the kitchen. Through the wall, they heard her grandfather stirring. "I'll get him," Sarah said. "No." Her mother poured her coffee into a travel mug. "That's my time block, remember? You focus on getting ready for school." Sarah hesitated by the door. "He'll be fine," her mother assured her. "Go on." Sarah grabbed her backpack, heavy with actual schoolwork instead of just memory cards now. Before leaving, she peeked into her grandfather's room. Her mother sat beside him, holding up photos from his teaching days. "Remember this classroom, Dad? You always said the window light was perfect for reading poetry." "Poetry," he repeated softly. "Keats in the morning light." Sarah smiled and headed to school. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. Sarah attended Ms. Thompson's tutoring sessions after school on Mondays and Wednesdays. Aunt Lisa came during lunch breaks on Tuesdays and Thursdays, armed with memory cards and endless patience. Even Uncle James kept his Sunday afternoon commitments, though he complained about missing football games. "Dad recognized me today," he announced during one family dinner. "Used my actual name and everything." "The consistency helps," Sarah explained, pulling out her observation log. "Look at the recognition patterns when we maintain regular visits. Always with the charts." Uncle James rolled his eyes, but he was smiling. Cousin Michael stopped by twice a week to review Sarah's documentation. "The correlation between social interaction and cognitive function is remarkable," he said, studying her latest graphs. "We should consider publishing this data." "Publishing?" Sarah looked up from her history homework. "As a case study. The medical community could benefit from understanding these patterns." Sarah thought about her grandfather's most private moments, documented in her careful notes. "I'll think about it." The professional caregiver, Mrs. Rodriguez, filled the gaps in the family schedule. She learned Sarah's memory card system quickly and added her own observations to the logs. "He responds well to music," she noted one afternoon, "especially when we play the old records from his collection." Sarah added it to her data. Classical music in the morning, jazz during afternoon rest periods. Another piece of the puzzle, another way to reach through the fog. Her own time with her grandfather shifted to evening hours now, after homework and tutoring. They sat together in the living room, going through photos and memories while the sun set. Some days were better than others. "I don't want to look at more pictures," he snapped one evening, pushing away the memory cards. "Where's my wife? Why isn't Rose here?" "Grandpa, remember? Grandma Rose passed away 5 years ago." No, she was just here. She was..." His hands began to shake. Sarah put the cards away. "Let's listen to some music instead." She put on one of his favorite Mozart records, and gradually his agitation faded. Other days brought unexpected moments of clarity. "You're doing better in school," he said during one session, surprising her. "Yes. How did you know?" "Heard your mother talking about it. Said you got a B on your science test." Sarah's throat tightened. "That's right. Always knew you were smart." He patted her hand. "Just like your grandmother." The moment passed, but Sarah recorded it in her journal with shaking fingers. He'd retained current information, made connections. Small victories that meant everything. At the 1-month review meeting, Dr. Williams studied her updated charts with growing interest. "The improvement in his sleep patterns is significant," he noted, "and the decrease in anxiety episodes, down by 70%, Sarah said proudly. "The routine makes a difference," her mother added. "We all see it." Even Michael nodded. "The data supports continuing the home care arrangement." Sarah caught herself holding her breath until Dr. Williams finally said, "I agree. Let's proceed with the next month of the trial period." That night, Sarah added new color-coded blocks to the schedule. Green for good days, yellow for mixed ones, red for the difficult times. The green blocks were slowly increasing. She found her mother studying the charts after dinner. "I didn't realize how much I'd missed him," her mother said softly. "Even just those small, clear moments. They mean so much now." "That's why we have to keep trying," Sarah replied. "Every memory matters." Her mother hugged her tight. "When did you get so wise?" "Learn from the best." Sarah nodded toward her grandfather's room, where he sat reading, occasionally murmuring lines of poetry to himself. The next day, Sarah arrived home from tutoring to find Aunt Lisa and her grandfather looking through old photo albums. "Tell me about this picture, Dad," Aunt Lisa said, pointing to a faded image. "Your high school graduation," he replied without hesitation. "You wore yellow because your mother said it matched your smile." Aunt Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't think you remembered that." "The memories are still there," Sarah said, dropping her backpack. "We just have to help them find them." She pulled out her observation log, recording another successful session. The pages were filling up with similar moments, small breakthroughs, brief connections, precious seconds of clarity strung together like beads on a string. That weekend, Uncle James arrived for his usual Sunday session, carrying a newspaper. "Thought we could do the crossword," he said gruffly. Dad always loved crosswords. Sarah watched from the doorway as her uncle and grandfather worked on the puzzle together. When her grandfather correctly remembered a quote from his favorite Shakespeare play, James actually laughed out loud. "That's my dad," he said later, wiping his eyes. "Still in there, still teaching us things." The second month's review meeting brought more positive news. Dr. Williams noted improved responses to cognitive tests. Michael reported stable vital signs. Mrs. Rodriguez documented better eating habits and more consistent sleep patterns. "Keep going," Dr. Williams encouraged. "Whatever you're all doing, it's working." Sarah added another green block to the schedule that evening. She had to squeeze it in between the other colors. The calendar was full now, covered in the evidence of their shared effort to keep her grandfather's memories alive. As she got ready for bed, she heard her grandfather's voice through the wall. "Sarah," he called out, "are we doing memory cards tomorrow?" Her heart leaped. He'd remembered her name and their routine. "Yes, Grandpa," she called back. "Right after I finish my homework." "Good," he said. "I like remembering things with you." Sarah pressed her hand against the wall, feeling the vibration of his words. Another small victory. Another moment to record in her ever-growing collection of proof that love and patience could build bridges across even the deepest fog of forgetting. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles, new battles against the relentless progression of his disease. But tonight, they had this, a grandfather who remembered his granddaughter's name, a family learning to help him hold on to himself, and a growing archive of moments proving that no memory was ever truly lost if someone cared enough to help find it again. Sarah sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by 3 months' worth of observation logs, charts, and memory cards. Tomorrow was the final evaluation meeting. Dr. Williams and the family would decide if her grandfather could stay home permanently. A knock on her door made her look up. Mrs. Rodriguez stood in the doorway. "Sarah, could you come here? We found something while cleaning your grandfather's room." In his bedroom, her grandfather sat in his chair while Mrs. Rodriguez held up an old leather briefcase. "It was behind his dresser," she explained. "There's something inside with your name on it." Sarah's grandfather watched with unusual focus as she opened the briefcase. Inside, she found a sealed envelope. Written on the front in her grandfather's neat handwriting, from before his diagnosis, was her name. "What is it, Grandpa?" He squinted at the envelope. "Important, I think. Can't remember what, but important." Sarah's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a letter and some official-looking documents. "Dear Sarah," she read aloud. "If you're reading this, it means things have gotten worse. The doctors say the forgetting will continue. But there are some things I want to make sure you remember." She had to stop, her vision blurring with tears. "Go on," her grandfather said softly. Sarah wiped her eyes and continued reading. "From the day you were born, I knew you were special. You have your grandmother's determination, your mother's compassion, and a brilliance all your own. You told me once, when you were 7, that you wanted to be a doctor, to help people who were sick or hurting. I remember that, Sarah whispered. I may not be able to see you achieve that dream, but I can help make it possible. Enclosed are documents for a trust fund I established years ago. It will cover your full medical school tuition when the time comes. Sarah's hands shook so badly, she almost dropped the letter. Behind the pages, she found bank statements and legal papers confirming a substantial educational trust in her name. Your grandmother and I started saving the day you first mentioned becoming a doctor. We called it our Sarah's Future Fund. Even if I can't remember this in the days to come, know that we believed in you. Know that we wanted to give you wings to fly. Mrs. Rodriguez quietly left the room as Sarah continued reading through tears. You may be wondering why I'm leaving this for you to find, instead of telling you directly. The truth is, by the time you read this, I may not be able to explain it properly. The thoughts slip away more each day. But my love for you, my faith in you, that will never fade. Her grandfather shifted in his chair. You're crying, he observed. Happy tears, Grandpa. Sarah showed him the letter. You did something amazing for me. He studied the paper without comprehension, but smiled at her joy. Sarah read the final paragraphs. Whatever happens, Sarah, remember this. Memories may fade, but love leaves marks that last forever. You've shown that to me these past months with your dedication and care. Now let me show it to you with this gift. All my love. Grandpa, Sarah set the letter down carefully. Her grandfather reached for her hand. Did I do something good? He asked. Yes, Grandpa. Something wonderful. That evening, Sarah showed the documents to her mother. I had no idea, her mother breathed, looking at the trust fund statements. Dad never told anyone. There's more. Sarah pulled out additional papers she'd found in the briefcase. Look at the date on the last deposit. Her mother's eyes widened. 2 months after his diagnosis. He was still adding to it. Even when he knew he was sick, even when the medical bills were piling up, they sat together on the couch, looking through years of careful savings and investments. That's Dad, her mother said softly. Always thinking ahead, always taking care of us. Sarah thought about all the times her grandfather had seemed lost in confusion, yet somehow held on to this one clear purpose, securing her future. The next morning, the family gathered for the final evaluation meeting. Dr. Williams reviewed 3 months of data while Sarah held her breath. The results are clear, he announced. Mr. Johnson's response to the home care program has exceeded expectations. His anxiety levels are down, his sleep patterns have stabilized, and his moments of lucidity, while still intermittent, show a consistent pattern when the memory exercises are maintained. Sarah squeezed her mother's hand. I recommend continuing the current arrangement, Dr. Williams continued. With regular monitoring and adjustments as needed, the relief in the room was palpable. Aunt Lisa dabbed at her eyes. Uncle James actually smiled. There's something else, Sarah said. She pulled out the letter and trust fund documents. Look what Grandpa did. As the family read through the papers, their expressions shifted from surprise to understanding. Even with everything happening to him, Michael said quietly, he was planning for your future. The medical school fund. Aunt Lisa shook her head in wonder. He never forgot what you wanted to be. That's not all. Sarah stood up and went to her grandfather's room. She returned with him a moment later, guiding him to his chair. Grandpa, she said clearly, tell them what you remembered this morning. He looked around the room, his eyes unusually focused. Sarah wants to be a doctor, he said, like Michael, to help people who forget things. The room fell silent. It was the clearest, most coherent thing he'd said in weeks. That's right, Grandpa. Sarah knelt beside his chair. And you helped make that possible? Good, he said simply. You'll be a good doctor. Like teaching. His voice trailed off, the moment of clarity passing. But Sarah had recorded it, like she'd recorded everything else. Another piece of evidence that love could bridge even the widest gaps in memory. Later that day, she added a final entry to her observation log. Date, today time, all-day observation. Even when the mind forgets, the heart remembers. Grandpa proved that by planning for my future, even as his past was slipping away. The trust fund isn't just money from medical school. It's proof that love leaves marks that last forever. Future plan. Continue memory exercises and family care schedule. Start researching pre-med programs. Keep documenting everything. Because every moment matters. Every memory counts, and every act of love leaves a legacy that even Alzheimer's can't erase. That evening, Sarah sat with her grandfather during his good hour, showing him pictures and sharing stories. Some he remembered, most he didn't, but he smiled at her voice and held her hand. "We have good days and bad days," she told him, "but we're together. That's what matters." He looked at her with momentary recognition. "Sarah," he said, "my granddaughter." "Yes, Grandpa. Always." Outside, the sun set over Alexandria, painting the sky in shades of promise. Sarah added another green mark to their calendar. One more good day. One more small victory in their ongoing battle against forgetting. The future would bring new challenges, new struggles, new moments of both clarity and confusion. But they would face them together, armed with love, patience, and the understanding that some bonds run deeper than memory. In the end, that was the greatest lesson her grandfather had taught her, not from his years as a professor, but from these months of fighting to remember. That love finds a way to endure, to connect, to matter, even when memories fade. Sarah closed her observation log and opened her first pre-med textbook. She had studying to do, a legacy to honor, and a future to build, one memory, one moment, one act of love at a time.